During NASA's November 19th livestream on the interstellar visitor 3I Atlas, something felt strangely heavy the moment the broadcast began. Not dramatic, not alarming, just weighted. The kind of weight that doesn't come from the information being shared, but from everything that isn't. The presenters spoke calmly, moving through rehearsed explanations about comets, dust behavior, well-known sublimation patterns, and instrument timelines. But beneath their words, there was a quiet tension, as if the silence behind the sentences mattered more than the sentences themselves. They talked for nearly an hour, yet revealed almost nothing new. And for an object arriving from beyond our solar system, silence is never meaningless. Silence in science is often a clue, one that appears when the data is complicated, incomplete, or not ready to fit into any familiar box. The images they showed were faint, dim streaks, distant frames, carefully cropped visuals that revealed almost nothing of what viewers around the world expected to see. A blurry glow, a stretched pixel trail, a tiny hazy dot surrounded by darkness. NASA reminded viewers several times that many instruments were still calibrating, that data was still being processed, that downlink delays were normal, but the repetition began to feel intentional, as though the real message wasn't what they said, but what they didn't say. The tone was calm but guarded, polite but constrained. It felt like watching someone walk carefully around a topic rather than through it. Before showing any data at all, the panel focused heavily on denying rumors and correcting online misunderstandings. They insisted repeatedly that 3I Atlas is simply a comet, ordinary, predictable, familiar. They said it with a steady rhythm, almost as if the sentence had been practiced. Yet the insistence itself felt oddly deliberate. Instead of letting the data speak for itself, they guided the audience toward a predetermined conclusion. The tone remained calm, but the structure of the briefing was unmistakable: reassure, stabilize, and keep the story contained. The more they insisted that everything was normal, the more the quiet gaps around those sentences suggested the opposite. What made this more noticeable was the sheer number of spacecraft aimed at 3I Atlas: Hubble, Webb, Lucy, Psyche, Maven, MRO, Solar Orbiter, even ground-based facilities like ALMA and the VLT. Nearly 20 missions had captured data from different angles and wavelengths, but in the live stream, NASA showed almost none of it. A few cropped frames here, a faint haze there. No raw imagery, no unfiltered spectrograms, no high-resolution composites, nothing from Webb's NIR spec, nothing from Hubble's WFC3, nothing from Lucy's long-range imager. It was like hearing someone describe a storm without showing a single satellite image. You're told it exists, you're told it's impressive, but you're not allowed to see it yourself. Even more curious were the details NASA mentioned quickly, almost too quickly. They briefly acknowledged an unusually high carbon dioxide ratio. They nodded at dust polarization that doesn't match most solar system comets. They mentioned a nickel-to-iron imbalance that could point to a different kind of formation history, and they touched on the possibility that 3I Atlas originated in a star system older than the Sun itself. These were major scientific clues, signals that the object carries chemistry from conditions Earth's telescopes have rarely sampled. But each of these clues, any one of which would normally spark deep scientific discussion, was pushed aside within seconds. The panel always returned to the same safe ground. Comets behave like this. Comets outgas unpredictably. Comets drift. Whenever a viewer question touched anything unusual, shape, motion, fragmentation, non-gravitational forces, or origin, the answers softened and dissolved into cautious phrasing. Too early to say, still being analyzed. Preliminary only. We don't want to speculate. The rhythm was unmistakable. The live stream didn't feel like a scientific update. It felt like the careful management of public expectation. It felt like NASA was trying to guide the interpretation of the event before the public had a chance to form its own. But silence is its own kind of signal. It doesn't always imply secrecy. Sometimes it reveals something else. Uncertainty, caution, data that doesn't fit neatly into the models. Science doesn't hide mysteries because they're dramatic. It hides them because they're unfinished. And right now, 3I Atlas seems to be an unfinished story. It is not just another comet drifting through the solar system. Its chemistry hints at a birthplace older than our sun. Its dust doesn't behave like typical Oort cloud objects. Its non-gravitational motion, while subtle, is not perfectly explained. These are natural scientific puzzles. Nothing supernatural, nothing threatening, just the kind of anomalies that require time. NASA knows how quickly early interpretations can be misunderstood by the public. They know what happened with Oumuamua, with the conversation spiraling rapidly into territory they could not control. So, instead of risking confusion, they kept the story narrow, safe, contained. They repeated the same sentences, not out of deception, but out of caution, out of a desire to avoid repeating a situation where the public imagination outran the data. The selective visibility was the strangest part. When NASA wants to share raw data, they show everything. Even noisy images, flawed angles, blown-out pixels. They show smudged Mars helicopter frames. They show saturated images of solar flares. They show raw rover thumbnails with dust on the lens. But with 3i Atlas, they showed almost nothing, choosing instead to describe what existed without letting the public see it for themselves. And the more they insisted that everything was normal, the more the silence around the missing pieces became noticeable. At several moments in the live stream, the presenters mentioned that some spacecraft had to rotate awkwardly or operate outside their ideal conditions to observe the object. They spoke about glare contamination, temperature fluctuations, off-axis imaging, calibration errors, compression artifacts. They explained all of these as reasons to be patient, but together, they formed a curious pattern, a list of reasons why the most important object in recent years, an interstellar visitor, could not be shown in detail yet. And then, there were the moments when the panel almost contradicted themselves. They would describe the object as perfectly ordinary, yet also mention chemistry that is exactly what scientists look for in pre-solar grains. They would describe its motion as normal, then admit it deviates slightly from gravitational predictions. They would say its dust is typical, then mention an unexpected polarization angle. These moments were small but telling, like glimpses through cracks in a closed door. When the live stream reached its final minutes, the most striking moment wasn't a discovery or an image, it was the tone. The soft, controlled reassurance that more data will come later, at an unspecified time, after analysis is complete. No timeline, no previews, no raw frames, just patience, trust, and silence. Not the silence of secrecy, the silence of something still forming. When an object drifts in from interstellar space, untouched by our sun, older than our planets, carrying the chemical fingerprints of a place we've never seen, science becomes careful. Institutions become protective, not because there is something frightening to hide, but because there is something delicate to understand. Something fragile that can be damaged by speculation, something that needs context before it can be shown clearly. So, when NASA avoided lingering on the unusual, it wasn't fear. It was caution, and caution, when repeated this consistently, becomes part of the mystery, a quiet shadow around the edges of the story, a reminder that even in the scientific world, silence can be strategic. It can be intentional, it can be necessary. Now 3i Atlas is moving away, slipping back towards the darkness beyond the sun. The data that hasn't been shown is still waiting somewhere inside NASA's servers. The unanswered questions are still hovering in the silence left behind. Maybe NASA wants to avoid fueling speculation. Maybe they want the final explanation to be precise. Or maybe, just maybe, the first interstellar visitor in years has brought clues that don't fit cleanly into the models we rely on. There is no conspiracy here. There is no hidden agenda. There is only the slow, careful process of trying to understand something that formed in a place older than the Earth itself, something that carries dust older than the planets, something that may have drifted for billions of years before reaching us. But the caution in the live stream, the deliberate slowness, the soft boundaries placed around certain topics, suggests that the data is not simple, that the story is not straightforward, that 3i Atlas may be an ordinary comet with extraordinary origins. Whatever the reason, the November 19th livestream left us with a message spoken not through facts, but through pauses. The silence was not empty. It was intentional. It was careful. It was the sound of a story still unfolding behind the scenes. Science rarely reveals everything at once. Sometimes the truth emerges quietly, in stages, as the universe chooses its timing. As 3i Atlas fades into the distance, the questions it raises remain here with us. If you felt the same tension between what was said and what wasn't, you're not imagining it. Some discoveries whisper louder through what's left unsaid. And when those whispers come from an object older than our sun, the silence around them becomes part of the discovery. And that's why this channel exists, for the quiet gaps, for the thin edges where official explanations soften, for the places where silence feels more honest than certainty, for the stories still forming in the dark. If you want to keep exploring the hidden sides of our universe, stay close. And if you're listening for the silence behind the answers, you're already part of this journey. Because in the vastness of space, the loudest truths are often the ones spoken softly, between the lines, in the shadows, and in the silence that lingers long after the live stream ends.